Here's the clip, by the way. You accused me of not.
That it won't,
you accused me of not mentioning that Theo Von did not ask you about Rick Scott. Let's go back and watch the clip.
Because,
no, I said I didn't say.
Bro, you literally look like the dude from
Instagram
Beetlejuice.
story.
That's crazy. The small head guy.
Ethan, I use my words very carefully. I said in the Instagram story that you posted. I don't watch your stream that much. I don't. I only
in the
see
waiting room.
Bro,
that's crazy. Do you see the resemblance?
What?
You're this guy from Beetlejuice. In this photo, you have like the same coat and shit.
Yeah.
That's
you are a comedian.
I sure am, buddy. I see you laughing. All right, anyway.
The confrontation between Ethan of the H3 podcast and Cenk's nephew that has been brewing for well over a year has finally happened. They finally agreed to do a debate. It happened over the weekend on Friday. It was nearly 5 hours long, and although we are definitely 100% not going to break down every minute of it, I'm only going to give you a couple of excerpts. It was funny to say the least, especially considering that Ethan Klein is not somebody who's very politically savvy, not somebody who's known as a debater or anything of the sort, and yet he handled Cenk's nephew, especially for the first 2 hours of the conversation, before Cenk's nephew went into filibuster mode, where he just tried to talk and distract from the point, and I think Ethan is just worthy of praise for how he interacted with him throughout the course of this conversation, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
So I want to get something out of the way really quickly, because every time I cover this topic, I always get comments saying that the only reason I'm covering this is because me am shill for Israel. And the reason I'm a shill for Israel is because I currently work for the David Horowitz Freedom Center. And I just want to make something abundantly clear to everybody out there in the audience. I never worked for the David Horowitz Freedom Center. In fact, I found out that David Horowitz himself, who I did know, passed away because some a-hole tweeted at me to try to get me angry. And then I ended up looking it up, so I wasn't even that well connected, apparently, that nobody even told me that the guy got sick. I used to produce the Stop K-12 Indoctrination series, which they distributed on them, but I was never an employee of this organization. And again, that was something like 5 or 6 years ago on this channel. The playlist is still up. Anybody can look for it. You can clearly and obviously see that this is not a Israel channel or anything of the sort. And again, it would be a weird thing for me to do to champion Ethan Klein on the Israel-Gaza issue when Ethan Klein agrees with Cenk's nephew 85% to 90% of the way on that specific topic. As we've broken down on this channel repeatedly, the reason that they're fighting is because even though Ethan's out to lunch on this particular issue, and I disagree with him, he wouldn't go as far as endorsing the wholesale slaughter of his wife's people, because his wife is an Israeli citizen, like Cenk's nephew would.
That is a super chat.
Did the Palestinians actually take civilian hostage, or is that fake news? I don't care.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he agrees with him, so let's just
go on.
The occupiers are not civilians. That is what it comes
Yeah.
down to. Like if imagine, like if
Sorry, go on.
Germany, let's say Germany to be
That's him, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
controversial.
And not that it matters.
invaded the United States, and they said, you know what, Cincinnati, Ohio is our ancestral home, and everyone knows that's blatantly false. But they take your home, they murder your grandma, they bulldoze like your neighbor's house. Are those people civilians there? No, they're occupiers, and those are criminals. That is, there are no civilians there. And
So according to Second Thought, he says that every Israeli is an occupier, and there are no citizens there.
I know, but
here's one.
No, of course there are examples of this. It's just entirely and utterly inconsequential, and I 100% stand by that.
It's not. He's an influential man. When you're expressing these kinds of...
Okay, let's walk through that. What do you think is the negative consequence of this? Do you think that people are going to see this and go, oh, I should go to...
So should I not care about it?
I think that if you look at the reality, and I know you recognize it, a YouTuber saying this kind of thing and spending any time or any effort on this, when your moral position is clear, when mine is clear, spending any time on this whatsoever to be like, we got to clean up our own homes here, deviates from the actual message that must be unflinching. The message is that these violent means of ensuring that the occupation continues is going to inevitably lead to more violence that Israelis will be subjected to as well.
Remember, the beef's origin point is when he asked Cenk's nephew to condemn somebody, saying it was okay to kill anyone in Israel proper because they're all settlers and none of them are civilians, and Cenk's nephew refused to do so. This is where the infamous baby settlers clip ends up coming in.
Palestinians have the legal ground to violently seize back their own homes from the settlers. This is a reality, and that is precisely the reason why they have to exist under endless occupation in the West Bank.
You know what? And that's why I say if it was settlers, that would be a lot more understandable. Yeah. But let's not obfuscate, okay? I understand what you're saying. But this dude just called babies militants.
No, I understand. And there are baby settlers as well. But there are baby settlers as well. There are babies in the settlement.
So yeah, to be clear, both of them are very anti-Israel. This is not a pro-Israel conversation or anything of the sort. This is an issue of somebody who is trying to please a left-wing audience, just like Jordan Peterson warned, who has been asked to do something that he finds to be repugnant. And in response to him refusing, to him standing up to the mob, he is basically getting attacked viciously in his personal life to the point where they're doing fraudulent CPS calls and sending human remains, specifically skulls, to his house as a way to intimidate him, even though, again, he agrees with these people 85 to 90% of the way. And this is made clear in the very beginning of this conversation.
Do you believe that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. So you agree with with numerous human rights organizations, the UN.
I already said yes.
Okay, great. No, that's important. Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
Now, with that in mind, you could see how ridiculous it is when he asks Cenk's nephew questions about how iDubbbz filmed the content cop in his home, and Cenk's nephew just says, oh, I don't care, and then he tries to hide behind the so-called genocide in Gaza as a way to obfuscate criticism for himself. In fact, there is a hilarious meme of Cenk's nephew basically strapping babies to him as a shield, because this is essentially what he does on his program.
How is this the conversation that you want to have right now?
One of the most cynical methods Hassan deploys to sidestep any criticism is to deflect to the ongoing genocide in Gaza. I've seen him do this so many times. He frames it like you are selfish for trying to criticize him, no matter what the reason is, because there's a genocide happening, man. How can you criticize me at a time like this?
Claiming that I am, too pro-Houthi. When someone is like focusing on that while there's an active ethnic cleansing campaign happening. He also apparently thinks Twitch is liable for me interviewing a Yemeni teenager who's only known genocide his entire life. In the middle of talking about genocide in Gaza, and this dumb blow your nose, brother. Love you, not trying to be mean. Just keep some tissue nearby and clear it out occasionally when needed. Much love. You, dude. My argument sucks? You think it justifies genocide? What are you, stupid? Everything that can be tangentially turned into like Jewish people are under attack is a decent way to just like drive discourse away from open genocide in Gaza. If your sole focus when Israel is doing a complete genocide in Gaza, if your sole focus revolves around that people are saying you're a Zionist, yeah, go fucking yell at streamers for not covering sufficiently the ongoing active genocide in Gaza instead of coming in here and chirping at me.
And by the way, it's something that Ethan called out in his content nuke, where he would just say genocide as a way to obfuscate all criticism. And of course, there's also the hypocrisy of Cenk's nephew, who will go after anybody on the right for anything that he believes to be or will interpret as a racial microaggression, while at the same time, this guy decided to buy a sword from an anime that he doesn't watch, even though he described it at the time that he saw it, and in other times, as the Nazi sword or the swastika sword. And this led to one of the funniest exchanges throughout the whole conversation.
I feel like I'm responding to a lot of bullshit that's been passed my way ever since Leftovers ended, starting from you and your community. Now, that's my answer to that. Now, let me ask you about this. This sword has a Nazi swastika hilt.
Okay.
Do you disagree? What's funny about that?
I think it's funny because you've made this a major point of contention. That's why I think it's funny.
It's a swastika, is it not?
Yeah, it's a sword that is a bleach sword, as you know already. that has a hilt that has a Japanese manji sign on it. But yes, it does look like a swastika, as I've also noticed and have talked about on numerous occasions that you brought forward.
Yeah, of course you're conceding that because we fished this up. But yeah,
such as when I made fun of, I believe it was Alexa that grabbed it, and I said, "Oh, you immediately go for the swastika one." Yeah, exactly. Do you think?
Anyway, my point is, Hassan, if I can continue, my point is that you knew it was a swastika sword. So why did you guys choose to pose with this sword?
Ethan?
Answer that. Why was the choice made for this sword?
I'm gonna gently explain this to you again. One, it's not a swastika, but regardless.
Do you think it looks like a swastika?
I did not make this editorial decision. I wasn't even.
Do you think it's reasonable to perceive that as a swastika?
Ethan,
answer the question. Is it reasonable to perceive that?
I don't think it was a deliberate decision that iDubbbz made, but I don't know. I don't know his mind.
Hassan, they're your swords, and according to the New York Times article, there was 10 options. So what's the chances that they chose the swastika one? That seems pretty slim.
Now look, to be clear, the bleach sword itself is not anti-Semitic or anything of the sort, but Cenk's nephew has said repeatedly that he is not a fan of bleach, and he noted that it was a swastika sword at the time that he bought it, and in the context of it being in a video and in photos associated with the video about how Ethan, a Jew, is lying about anti-Semitism, it seems rather weird that they keep tilting this particular sword toward the camera so that you can see it, and then pretending like it's not even remotely reasonable for Ethan to interpret it in this way, especially considering there are multiple other swords that could have been grabbed for. And again, Cenk's nephew had shown us time and time again that he describes this as the Nazi sword.
Let me paint a scenario. Hassan, let me paint a scenario for you, okay? Listen, okay? This is important. You participated in a video accusing a Jewish man of exaggerating anti-Semitism. You exhibited in that video the most hateful symbol against Jewish people. 1 out of 10 of your swords that you have previously already stated is the, quote, swastika sword. So am I insane for you're treating me like I'm insane for bringing this up, but it sounds pretty reasonable.
I mean, it's a little insane.
So yes. Microaggressions just don't exist for Jewish people.
You're asking me why iDubbbz.
It's your sword, bro. I don't believe that you weren't there.
I'm not iDubbbz.
You were there, bro. It's in your house.
I don't know why you're asking me.
Because it's your house and your sword.
Now again, everyone acknowledges that the sword in the context of the Bleach anime has nothing to do with Jews, it's nothing to do with anti-Semitism or anything of the sort, and whether or not you think that it does in the context of this particular photo, where they're tilting it to the camera so everybody could see it, that's up to you. But the fact is, it's not crazy for Ethan to acknowledge this, especially after video came out of Cenk's nephew describing this as the swastika sword, and basically that being his first reaction whenever anybody picks this up at his house. Obviously, it seems like they would have known based on what we've seen in these previous videos, and I do believe that this is intentional, just so they could say, oh, well, actually, we tricked you, that's the bleach sword, haha, whatever. But Cenk's nephew's defense is even worse.
And why should he leave it up? You have that much of an issue with swastikas, considering you drew one on PewDiePie.
I'm a Jewish man, you fucking moron.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Is anyone in that room Jewish? What's anyone in that room? Did I draw swastika one time on?
Do you think that Jews have an exclusivity agreement with like being offended or not offended by Nazi imagery? You've done a Sig Heil approximately 50 times.
Why did I do a Sig Heil? Why did I do a Sig Heil?
I don't know.
Because you only watch clips on Twitter. I was making fun of Elon Musk and trying to see if it was valid or not.
Oh, thank you.
And by the way, as a Jewish man, are you going to tell black people not to use the N-word?
Wait, what?
Are you going to tell black people not to use the N-word because it offends you?
Do you think this is an apt comparison?
Yes.
Okay. So you think that being able to draw your anti-Semitism radar is completely out of whack.
And who are you to say that to me? You pose with a swastika.
You're saying that it's not a swastika, and you know it's not a swastika.
I mean, It literally is a swastika.
All right, so just think about how stupid this is. They're saying that Ethan, because 9 years ago on his podcast, he drew a swastika on PewDiePie, his friend, as a joke, by the way, because he doesn't believe PewDiePie is a Nazi. Therefore, that is equivalent to all these creators that, again, have said very questionable things about Ethan, very borderline anti-Semitic things about Ethan, joined together in a video to say that Ethan is just imagining all the anti-Semitism that is directed toward him, picked up this specific sword that is described by Cenk's nephew, and by the way, it's his sword at his house, as the swastika sword. He's saying that those two things are equivalent. Again, absolutely terrible defense, embarrassing in every possible way, and this is how the conversation went, at least for the first 2 hours of it, although I will point out that Ethan started to drag later on as Cenk's nephew tried to filibuster to the end of the conversation, essentially ruining any kind of dialogue that these two could have, but this is to be expected.
That is anti-Semitic.
I don't think you're in the ADL, Ethan, if that's what you're going to say.
Well, you said, and I'll quote a tweet that you made. Okay?
Yeah.
Go ahead. You said... I'll quote, he worked with the ADL to make Zionists a protected class on Twitch. Now, that is an outright lie.
I don't think it's an outright lie.
I worked with the ADL.
Took credit over it, didn't you?
Sorry. I worked with the ADL? What does that mean?
Yeah, as in, like, worked alongside. I don't think you're in the ADL.
Oh, that's what you meant when you said I worked with the ADL. I worked beside them, just incidentally together. You didn't mean that I worked with them privately to get people banned? Of course not.
And one of the funniest parts about this conversation is the point where Ethan wanted to bring up the fact that Cenk's nephew was spearing him, claiming that Ethan worked for the ADL and whatnot, even though that is clearly and obviously false, and the only link between Ethan and the ADL is the fact that the ADL is a Jewish organization that often complains about anti-Semitism, and Ethan had an issue with the tier list that featured him, but because they're both Jews, Cenk's nephew said repeatedly that Ethan worked with them to get Muslims banned from Twitch.
No, I do think that.
Didn't you say you choose your words very carefully?
Alongside the ADL.
You just told me briefly ago, you choose your words very carefully, Hassan.
Not always. I'm famously...
Okay, we're walking that back. Sometimes I speak out the side of my mouth when I say you work with the ADL. So. Here you are again repeating the lie with Steiny on video. Go ahead. You had time
constantly come after me when his knows I'm not anti-Semitic and making these inferences that I am, and like partnering with like the ADL and
partnering with the ADL. You want to unpack that one there, buddy?
Yeah. Again, partnering with the ADL. That is precisely what took place.
I have never spoken to the ADL, so what does that mean?
I'm not saying you directed the ADL
Do you know
to take
how
action.
silly you
Well, actually,
look?
you know what? I am kind of saying that. I am implying that you directed the ADL to take action.
Well, that's a defamatory claim that has zero proof. And frankly, it sounds a little Jewish conspiratorial.
If I thought that you worked for the ADL, I wouldn't have
I've not spoken to the ADL.
I would have said you worked for the ADL. Now, what's interesting to me, of course,
Hassan,
about this is that
I do not work with the ADL
for these bans.
Hassan, I do not work with the ADL.
You were a part of the mass smear campaign.
That is not working with the ADL. Would you say that
falsely claimed
I got nothing to do with the ADL? Blame Frogan for doing a racist panel at TwitchCon that became a viral story.
Even though I will also point out that these specific creators only got suspended for 30 days, and one of the creators, as Cenk's nephew points out, was a Jew, which, by the way, led to Ethan's most hilarious line, or one of his most hilarious lines throughout the course of this whole conversation.
You know, I think that
you got a Jewish content creator alongside multiple Arab content creators banned off the platform for 30 days.
There's a reason they call him token,
and then the
my
ADL
friend.
Actually reacted.
You spend time being a token, you're going to get spent.
But it was just silly, you know.
You want to cash in on your Jewish friends anymore? Or can we move on?
Am I what?
Would you like to cash in on your Jewish friends more, or can we move on?
Cash in on my Jewish friends.
That's right.
The token Jew eventually gets spent. Come on. That's pretty funny, guys. That's pretty hilarious. But again, this is what Ethan's talking about with the anti-Semitic dog whistles or something of the sort. The idea that you're going to claim that just because Ethan is Jewish and he was mad about being personally targeted by these individuals, and the ADL was also angry, that Ethan was working for or working with the ADL without any proof. And Cenk's nephew tries to weasel out of this but obviously he's sending the signal to his audience that Ethan, Jew, married to an Israeli, working with ADL, Jewish organization, in order to censor the innocent Baba Angel Muslim.
Hassan, can I ask you a question? Are you working with the Neo-Nazi Party of America? Because they're also anti-Zionist. No, seriously. Are you working with the Neo-Nazi Group of America who's also anti-Zionist? Do you work with them? Are you affiliated with them? Are you partnered? Are you partnered with neo-Nazis? Or do you guys happen to have the same goal and are completely related?
Now, by the way, Ethan took the time to label with time codes all the different various segments throughout the course of his particular stream with Cenk's nephew. And one of the funniest parts about this is that Ethan tried bringing up this guy who, by the way, was a fan of Cenk's nephew, ended up turning out to not be a fan later on of Cenk's nephew. He even posted a video about it later. And Cenk's nephew tried to delay and stall out this particular clip from showing up because he knew it would be embarrassing for him by focusing on this guy claiming that he wasn't a fan, even though he clearly and obviously was.
Is this the guy?
Yeah, you remember.
Wait. No, this is the guy that you claimed was my fan, right? He was calling me the fucking
there's a clip of being like, yo, I love this dude. Anyway, who cares if he's your fan or not?
No. Hold on.
No.
You brought this dude up.
It doesn't matter. I'm showing him as an example of you.
It does matter.
Okay, fine. He's not a fan. I don't care.
You brought him up. Wait, what do you mean you don't care?
If I brought him up, Hassan, let me finish my point.
That person is not a fan of mine. Why did you make it seem like that person was a fan of mine then?
I want to say that Cenk's nephew spent like 5 to 10 minutes of this segment trying to stall and delay and filibuster on this specific person rather than letting Ethan get to his point, because he knew it looked really bad of him to say because Ethan is a Jew, he works with the ADL.
I'll answer. Would you like me to answer? That's one example of many. Seeing your response in the totality of all the responses shows that you do deny the rapes that happened on October 7th. In fact,
the totality of all my responses.
In fact, you had promised me, and I know you would never lie to me, that you would watch the context puke with me. So why don't we pull up that bit there, and we can see how out of context it is.
Boom. Do it.
Great. Someone pulling that, Dan? No, I got it.
Deny the
violent rapes that took place. That is way beyond the pale.
I'm grabbing another soda, but I'm hearing you. There is one instance in captivity.
Chair react.
That we have.
I'm not going to let you chair react to me, buddy. You grab that Dr. Pepper. I'll wait.
No, I said I'm listening to you. Don't worry. I was just grabbing another soda. Go ahead.
On the pale.
Is that there is one instance in captivity. Did you put a Hamas headband on me?
I sure did.
There is one instance in captivity that we have actually gotten verifiable evidence on. Beyond that, the systematized mass rapes that Hamas dealt on October 7, not a single bit of that has been verified. And people still run with it over and over and over again.
Many young people who were simply attending a music festival. Women were horribly raped.
I can't see myself, by the way, if you're showing my
reaction. You're giggling. You're giggling. It's so funny.
Has a right to defend itself.
I'm not giggling.
You sure are.
Bro, what rapes did Hamas do? What are you talking about?
What rapes did Hamas do?
Stop Anti-Semitism account that considered me to be anti-Semite of the week has also been hallucinating rapes once again. Doing rape fantasies once again.
Now, the next thing that I want to point out is, of course, Cenk's nephew's decision that he is going to deny the rapes that occurred on October 7th. And the reasons why that he denies these rapes are absolutely amazing in every possible way. So we got to jump to that section so we can get the boil down of Cenk's nephew's counter argument to the idea that there were rapes committed during the October 7th attacks.
Watch this.
Horrific acts of sexual violence.
Ethan.
Hassan, I am so sorry. You promised that we would watch this. I pulled it up. Now sit silently and enjoy.
Okay. But I got the point. You're saying that you're showing clips of me. You're showing clips of me saying that someone is
men and boys slaughtered after enduring sexual violence. The deadliest day for the Jewish people.
Doesn't matter if fucking rapes happen on October 7th. Like, that doesn't change the dynamic for me even this much. So that's the other part of this problem that many people that can't contend with. Like,
I can't believe how quickly leftists go from believe all women to pics or it didn't happen. There you go, Hassan. What do you got?
Pics or it didn't happen. That's great commentary, by the way. Okay.
I mean, it's pretty apt.
Okay. So let's talk about it. You did actually. I'm surprised. You did actually show my findings on the UN committee report that came out.
The one that you misrepresent?
So yeah, that compilation is the setup. Cenk's nephew says that he's citing this UN report. Ethan ends up pulling out the conclusion to the UN report. He reads that paragraph to Cenk's nephew, and this is where we get a response that honestly just goes to show you how stupid people are. And by the way, this works 100% for people out there in the audience.
Now, are you aware how these kind of papers work? They do a very precise conclusion at the end that summarizes the main thesis and points driven home in the article. That's what the conclusion is. Let me read it for you. Overall, based on the totality of information gathered from multiple and independent sources at different locations, there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred at several locations across the Gaza periphery, including in the form of rape, gang rape, during the October 7th, 2023 attack. Credible, circumstantial information, which may be indicative of some forms of sexual violence, including genital mutilation, sexualized torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, was also gathered.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm gonna walk you
Are
through
they
this real
hallucinating?
quick.
So yeah, that's the paragraph that's in the conclusion of the report that Cenk's nephew ends up citing to say that there were no rapes on October 7th, even though, again, they find people's genitals mutilated, they found women with their pants down, and all sorts of other things that would be indicative of sexual assaults occurring. But Cenk's nephew says, oh, well, you know what? Some of these witness testimonies, they were not true, even though he's citing very fringe outlets and their statements about these witness testimonies and how they're contradicted when they're actually not contradicted. But then he goes on to say that there's no forensic evidence to prove it and that the circumstantial evidence is not nearly enough.
No, so you just don't know what words mean. So credible circumstantial evidence. Do you know what that means?
It means that of course.
Credible circumstantial evidence is not a substitute for forensic evidence. Credible
That's why I said Pixar didn't happen, bro.
Not
You need
enough
rape
to
kits.
prosecute.
Hassan needs
Credible
rape kits.
circumstantial evidence is not enough.
Pixar didn't happen, right?
Prosecute rape, which is precisely the reason why the Israeli prosecutors themselves have said that in the absence of a singular victim coming out, and also with all of the forensic evidence that has been tarnished already.
Show me evidence for anything you're saying.
What?
That's not. Show me evidence for anything you're claiming that isn't some unhinged freak on Twitter.
Now, look, I know a huge portion of the population gets all their information from legal procedurals, and one of the things that they often say in these legal procedurals is it's circumstantial. That case is based on circumstantial evidence, and this gets it into people's minds that circumstantial evidence is somehow lesser evidence.
No, so you just don't know what words mean. So credible circumstantial evidence. Do you know what that means?
It means that of course.
Credible circumstantial evidence is not a substitute for forensic evidence. Credible
That's why I said Pixar didn't happen, bro.
Not
you need
enough
rape
to
kits.
Prosecute.
Hassan needs
Credible
rape kits.
circumstantial evidence is not enough.
Pixar didn't happen, right?
Prosecute rape.
And forensic evidence, that's something that's way higher than circumstantial evidence, when in reality, forensic evidence falls under the category of circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is more than enough evidence to convict because there's only two types of evidence. There's eyewitness testimony and confessions, which go under the category of direct evidence, and then every other thing that you can think of as evidence, aka forensics, whatever you want to talk about, that is all considered circumstantial evidence. So yeah, circumstantial evidence is more than enough in order to prove that these occurred, but then Cenk's nephew takes it a step further, and I find this to be absolutely hilarious.
But there's no forensic examination.
Pixar didn't
there has
happen.
been no justice for these victims in
Pixar didn't
Israel
happen.
on October 7 due to the fact that the government completely
I'm cracking open a root
ruined.
beer.
Okay. The government completely ruined any sort of forensic examination that could have taken place. There is no way
Or
to
firsthand-
actually.
Are you
there is no
actually
way
like-
to actually bring justice to these victims. Your assessment on this is so off base.
Hassan, are you
because
listening?
You think
For firsthand
think-
victims. I just read it to you.
Okay, but
Let's.
what
You know
I'm
what?
giving you
You're
is
right.
the Israeli
You know what,
prosecutor's
Hassan? You're
office
right. Let's
own
err on the side
statement.
of these
If there are
victims
victims
lying.
then, why are
Let's
there-
err
why
on the
have
side.
they
No,
not?
you're totally right. This is the progressive way. Let's err on the side of these people lying instead of believing them. Let's do that. And
No,
yeah, they're all
I'm
lying.
not saying that they're lying. I'm telling
Yes, you are.
my confusion on this comes from the fact that
it's not confusing. It's obvious. Most of this shit happened, were killed, and it's a religious part of this first responding unit that they bury the bodies immediately to avoid humiliating them. It's all explainable.
What?
Yes. If you don't know that, then you are like woefully misinformed, which just
dude, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Oh, it doesn't matter. There has to be a forensic examination.
Pixar didn't happen.
So I just want to make something clear for everybody out there in the audience. The reason Cenk's nephew is denying the sexual assaults, denying the rapes and whatnot, is because he supports Hamas. He supports the October 7th attacks. Let us be clear about that. Let us be unambiguous in our language about that. But he knows that it's a bad look if he supports an attack that also included rape, which is clearly and obviously a war crime and wildly inappropriate, so he's denying this in order to make Hamas look better. But the way he does it right there is entirely sinister. So what he's talking about is that some of the victims of this attack ended up getting killed, obviously, and in certain Jewish traditions, they don't do autopsies on the body. It is considered desecrating of the body. So when they ended up finding the bodies of their loved ones, they wanted to do a religious burial. Now, obviously, if you are prosecuting a criminal case, this would compromise some of the forensic evidence. Again, you're not supposed to touch them. You're not supposed to throw blankets over them. You're not supposed to do all the things that you do, again, if you're prosecuting a criminal case. And then Cenk's nephew ends up going on to say that a Southern District prosecutor for Israel hasn't brought a single criminal case related to October 7th in terms of rape charges, which is, again, would be something that was interesting if we were talking about regular, ordinary acts of criminality. But in reality, they're not charging Hamas because these people fled back to Gaza, and a lot of them got killed as well, both the victims and the perpetrators of these particular crimes. The idea that the standard is, are we going to have a criminal prosecution?
The Israeli prosecutor Moran Gitz has acknowledged that 15 months after the events of October 7, 2023, Israel has still not identified any victims in which a case can be brought against an alleged perpetrator of a sexual attack.
And if there is no criminal prosecution, the crime didn't occur, is absurd in every possible way, especially considering that when they arrest people for terrorism from Gaza, Cenk's nephew says that they're being kidnapped and those are false charges anyway. So to be clear, he wouldn't believe it if they convicted them, but the idea that you're just going to send out an indictment to Hamas command and demand they extradite their own person for them to be trialed in regular ordinary Israeli court for this is just a ridiculous absurdity in every possible way. But again, that is the standard that he's holding to for Hamas in order to be guilty of any of these particular rapes. By the way, this is not a standard that he holds to in the United States of America, where you are going to pursue a regular, ordinary criminal case. In the United States of America, then it's believe all women. But in this particular case, it's like, oh, no, we need a full forensic preservation, and we also need arrest, charge, and conviction. By the way, I'm going to dismiss that conviction as basically a racist trial against them if that were to happen. But again, we're talking about crimes committed during a war that is ongoing. The idea that a prosecutor hasn't given a warrant to Hamas in order to arrest somebody is absurd as a standard in order to enforce to determine whether or not this happened. Another trick that Cenk's nephew does, by the way, is he also tries to make the allegations or the standard so specific that you can't possibly meet it.
At that point, I personally took a position where I said very carefully and very deliberately that mass rapes that are directed by Hamas did not happen. There was no evidence for this whatsoever.
Now, again, this is clearly and obviously him moving the goalpost once again, because right off the top, he said his standard was this UN report. And then in that UN report, he said there was no forensic evidence presented, even though it says that they have the circumstantial evidence. They then describe the circumstantial evidence, and forensic evidence is included under the rubric of circumstantial evidence. Cenk's nephew is just completely unaware of that reality because he gets all his legal knowledge from legal procedural shows where they diminish circumstantial evidence. But then, in addition to that, he says, oh, well, the standard is that the Israelis need to name the victims, file criminal charges as if Hamas is a regular part of Israel, and then charge and convict them, and then that will be proof. But then he moves it even further and says that you need to have proof of Hamas as an organization ordering systematized rape against Israelis.
At that point, at that point, I personally took a position where I said very carefully and very deliberately that mass rapes that are directed by Hamas did not happen. There was no evidence for this whatsoever.
So what this essentially means is that even if you were to have this absurd scenario where the Israelis did drop an indictment on somebody in Hamas who committed this rape, they did extradite this person to Israel, which Cenk's nephew would call a kidnapping. They then put him on trial, which, by the way, Cenk's nephew would liken to a racist trial against an innocent Beba Angel black person with an all-white jury. But even if he were to accept that, he still wouldn't count that as what he's talking about, because essentially it has to be ordered directly in the rules of engagement by Hamas that they would commit these rapes in order for him to say, okay, it was systematized, systemicized in terms of what we're talking about here. And again, this is just the weaselly tactics that Cenk's nephew tries to use throughout the course of this conversation in order to obfuscate the fact that he's making excuses and downplaying the horrors of Hamas's actions on October 7th, because spoiler alert, he supports Hamas. I don't know how to make this any more clear. He supports them, Hezbollah, all these different terrorist organizations. And again, it is not just limited to organizations that are against Israel. It's also organizations that are against the United States of America. The guy is anti-American.
You said this, which is, you said in the context puke. There was more. You said this was the worst thing I did. So let me play it, okay? And then we can discuss.
More Jews displaced than Palestinians.
Let me go back
to the 1948 countries,
just to give the whole context.
Expelled them in massive amounts following the 1948 war. In fact, there was more Jews displaced than Palestinians.
This was one of the worst pieces of misinformation I've seen in the context puke. For the record, it was crazy.
This specific. So Mike, again, nicely done. Let this guy hold your hand and formulate your opinions, but he's not here to help you. Okay. So you tell me what was wrong with what was misinformation about saying that 900,000 Jews were displaced?
Now, finally, I want to get into the Jewish expulsion from the Middle East section of this conversation. Again, I'm breezing through this particular video because it's so long. You can watch it in full because it's another example of Cenk's nephew completely embarrassing themselves. So let me just give you guys a quick rundown of the history right here related to this so we could just show you the clips and get through this as quick as possible. So you have the Israel Independence War where they end up getting their state. They obviously displace a bunch of different Muslim Arabs from what is Israel proper. This is referred to by said Muslim Arabs as the Nakba, aka like the catastrophe or the cataclysm. I forget which one it directly translates to, and it's something like 700,000 Muslims are displaced from their homes at the time that this actually occurred. Now, of course, this is a consequence of the war that happened, but again, this is something that both Ethan and Cenk's nephew acknowledge as this great horror. Now, in response to that, and later on in response to other Israeli victories, you had a bunch of different Arab majority countries expel their Jewish population for revenge because they wanted to punish the Jews in their own country, even though those populations had existed there for thousands of years, due to the fact that the Jews beat the Muslims in the war to establish the state of Israel. Now, Ethan is somebody who points out that this is also horrible, and in reality, these people did not leave these Middle Eastern countries because they wanted to go to Israel. They left due to the rise of anti-Semitism within these different various countries, and actually more Jews were displaced during these expulsions than the Muslims that were displaced during the so-called Nakba. So we all understand what we're talking about right here, and Cenk's nephew decides that he's going to obfuscate this point, deflect from it, try to dodge it, try to say that Ethan is trying to compare the two or something of the sort or equivocate them, when Ethan is not saying that. What he's saying is that anti-Semitism in the Arab world ended up creating more Zionists, which is what these people say that they hate.
How many left voluntarily?
Israel
how
or
many,
France?
How many of the 900,000 left voluntarily?
I don't know the exact number of how many left voluntarily. Do you?
Take a guess.
I would suspect that a big chunk of them, you're going to say, did not leave voluntarily, but that is not the case.
Well, you're lying and you're dead wrong. You brought up the fact that I talked about what happened in Iraq. So let me give you a timeline of what happened in Iraq. 1932, they gain independence. 1934, Hebrew is banned. Jews are fired from government positions. 1938, Zionist activity is outlawed. Crimes as trivial as possessing a biblical map of the Holy Land will send you to jail. The Farhud pogrom, inspired by neo-Nazis, Rashid al-Khalini killed 180 Jews. Hundreds were injured. Widespread looting, property damage. 1947, Jews were banned from immigrating because they didn't want them to go strengthen the state of Israel, and they wanted to hold them prisoners against Israel and the West. In 1948, the war begins. Jewish banks were forbidden to transact with foreign countries. Jews were arrested for Zionist activity, for economic crimes. They were fines that were paid to the Ministry of Defense. In 1949, a month after taking office, the British learned that they were planning to expel the Jews from Iraq before they even left. Does this sound like volunteer? Does this sound voluntary? Does that sound voluntary?
Here, I sent you a clip.
No.
One of the most important scholars on this issue.
Oh my God!
Is
please.
an Iraqi Jew by the name of Avi Shlaim.
Now, Cenk's nephew ends up bringing up a couple of bombings. I think it was 3 out of 5 bombings that supposedly was the real reason why the Jews left Iraq in order to go to Israel. And he says that Zionist or pro-Zionist people committed these 3 bombings. And that is the entire reason why hundreds of thousands of Jews ended up leaving the Middle East in order to go to Israel proper. Now, of course, he ends up citing a particular scholar. Ethan is ready for him. He pulls up that scholar, and that scholar says, well, that was only a few of the bombings that actually occurred, and most of the Jews were already ready to leave due to the fact that they were obviously militating against the Jews. And also, Ethan lays out a timeline that shows that the anti-Semitism rise in the Arabic world actually predates the creation of the State of Israel, and is actually more aligned with the rise of the Nazis in Germany, as these people decided that they didn't like their Jewish population either. So to be clear, laws that were restrictionist and whatnot were implemented first, then the State of Israel was created post-World War II, then the expulsions happened. That's the actual timeline of events, but Cenk's nephew doesn't want to address that, and then he has this meltdown where he starts calling Ethan racist because he's trying to say, oh, the Iraqis, they're not Palestinians.
Now explain what he means by that. We did not leave Iraq because we were Zionists. We left because we were no longer safe.
Iraqis are not Palestinian, you f***ing moron, you racist piece of shit.
What?
Because Iraq and the pan-Arabic nationalist movements that arise out of
you are
Zionist
out of your mind.
Is not about Palestinians.
Okay, so what did the Jews in Iraq have to do with Israel? You bigot! You are so out of your mind.
And then Iraqis,
dude, you screaming and grandstanding doesn't mean you're right.
Iraqi government's racism during the pan-Arabic nationalist movements as a vindication for why, or a comparison as to why Israel had to do the Nakba.
Do you think
racist piece of shit?
Thanks, Hassan.
Do you think Iraq? Do you think all Arabs have one mind?
Why
is that what you?
Were that Iraqi Jews leaving Iraq in fear?
Of course, there were Iraqi Jews that left Iraq in fear. I've never said that there were no
Answer
Iraqi
the question.
Jews that left
You want to
Iraq
call
in
me
fear.
racist? Why were Iraqi Jews leaving to go to Israel?
Because you're a fucking moron.
That's why they left. They left because I'm a fucking moron.
That Arabs are
Hassan,
not
you
one-minded.
coward.
That there
you
were numerous
coward.
pan-Arabic
Answer
nationalist
the question. You're going to call me racist, but you won't answer. Why did the Iraqi Jews leave Iraq?
There were numerous
because of
reasons.
anti-Semitism. They hated Jewish people that had nothing to do with Israel. They were forced to. They were chased out. They lived there for thousands of years. They had businesses. They had homes that they were forced and abandoned to go to Israel because it was the only place they could. Why would Iraqis hate the Jews living there if they had nothing to do with Zionism or Israel? Why?
Because settler colonialism
that has nothing to do with them, you absolute fucking dumbass. What does that have to do with the Iraqi Jews?
So Ethan was never claiming that the Iraqis were Palestinians or the Egyptians were Palestinians. Cenk's nephew realized that he's caught in a corner right here. He doesn't want to concede that the expulsion of Jews from the Muslim world was something that was bad. It's something that he complains about when, again, it's the instance of Jews expelling Muslims from what is now Israel, because that would obviously lead him to some awkward conclusions. So instead, he starts screaming at Ethan, trying to paint him as a racist. And then he does this thing when he asks him who is behind the expulsion. Ethan says the Arabs, these Arab countries. And Cenk's nephew pretends like he's saying all Arabs are bad. And he's like, wow, so racist.
900,000 Jews, approximately 700 to 900,000, were forced to become Zionists, not by choice, but because they were forced out. The vast majority went to the Arabs. The anti-Semitic Arabs.
There you go.
There you go. What? That's my point. Are you okay?
I rest my case.
Okay. Well, I mean, you can.
No, you're too delusional to realize what kind of racist nonsense
That's
you're fucking
unbelievable,
on. That was
bro.
my entire
it's
point.
Historic.
Thank you.
I mean, it's historical. You don't know anything of what you're talking about. Avi Schleim, once again, because you don't want to contend, you like to use him when it's convenient. He left because they were Zionists. They left because they were afraid.
Arabs. What was Avi Schleim, by the way?
Yeah, he was an Arab Jew. They didn't see him that way. They kicked his ass out. I'm not saying Arabs. There's a reason for it. There was a rise in Arab nationalism following the 1948 war. They blamed their own Jewish populace for what Israel did. That's anti-Semitism. They had nothing to do. Do you think the Iraqi Jews left their 2,000-year-old communities, left their businesses, left their houses because they wanted to go to Israel? Are you f***ing mad?
Ethan,
you
remember
deny.
a while back I tweeted and you got really mad when I said that there's a double standard between Islamophobia and
absolutely
anti-Semitism?
a double standard, and you exhibit it, my friend.
And you're participating in it right now without even recognizing
it's historical.
that you're doing so.
I mean, I'm just telling you
what
happened.
Historical racism. All Arabs
they were
are not
racist.
responsible.
Do people never get racist?
And Ethan, because he's actually trying to have a normal, regular conversation, doesn't even realize that Cenk's nephew is trying to frame him as saying something bad about all Arabs, when in reality, nothing could be further from the truth.
Because people like you ignore the trauma of the fact that you want to tell that people in Israel to go back to where they came from. This is where they're from. They were forced to go to Israel.
They could right now. They could go tomorrow.
Really? The Iraqi Jews can go back to their home tomorrow. The Egyptian Jews can go back to their homes tomorrow.
Absolutely.
That is insane. You are out of your mind.
Yes, they can.
Okay,
they
how? Tell me how.
Can.
How did the Jews go back to their...
They don't want to, and I understand why they wouldn't want to, because America fucking invaded and destroyed Iraq. But yes, they could.
How?
The Iraqi Jews have been allowed to return to Iraq, and there have been numerous instances where Jews were given an opportunity to return if they wanted to.
How many Jews live in Iraq?
What?
How many Jewish people?
I don't know. I think it's 0 right now, but they can.
How many Jews live in the Middle East outside of Israel?
Why would it?
Virtually none. Where'd they go?
Why would Iraqi
if it was so great for them?
Why would Iraqi Jews not want to go to Iraq, you think, right now?
0 Jews, virtually 0 Jews live outside of Israel in the Middle East. Why is that? You don't think that none of them wanted to stay at home?
He also makes the claim that Jews can return to Iraq, a nation with literally 0 Jews in it, and can return to other countries in the Middle East. This is just nonsense in every possible way. Again, when Yasser Arafat was pretending to be in favor of a peace process, he wanted the unlimited right of return for Arabs into Israel proper. And he said, don't worry about it. You guys can leave Israel, which again is something that the Israelis probably wouldn't be in favor of, and go back there in theory once we hammer out these details. But Cenk's nephew is trying to make the case that the Muslim world are very welcoming to the Jewish people. All they have to do is go move to Iraq and all the countries that they were booted from post Israel becoming a state. Hey guys, editing Sean here, and I have one final point about this whole situation, which is, of course, that I think Ethan, when he was saying goodbye to Cenk's nephew, almost called him Cenk's nephew. Listen to the clip right here.
All right, have a good night, Hassan.
Oh. See, he was like, bye, and then he ends up churning to call him whatever this other name is that I'm not familiar with, but I don't know.
All right, have a good night, Hassan. All right, have a good night. Good night, Hassan.
Now again, this could just be me speculating, this could be just me imagining it, but it seems like he was about to call him Cenk's nephew right there. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Again, this is all ridiculous and this is all absurd, and like Jordan Peterson pointed out, Ethan, of course, is being held to a higher and higher standard that he can't possibly meet, and these people are bloodthirsty to see him fall, and this is a perfect example of that. Now, of course, I'm going to leave it here. There's so much more in this that you can watch in full context if you want to, link in the description, but as per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Ethan destroying Cenk's nephew. Till next time.